You don't know flag. You don't know flag.
Welcome to You Don't Know Flag, a podcast full of stories about retro gaming, retro computing, video games, arcade games, and technology from a guy who was there and still is. My name is Rob O'Hara, but for the next 30 minutes, you can call me Flag.
Episode 126. The Nintendo Entertainment System.
Hello, and welcome to episode 126 of You Don't Know Flack. Today is Sunday, March 3rd, 2013, and I am your host, Rob Flack O'Hara. Today on You Don't Know Flack, I'll be sharing my memories of the great Nintendo Entertainment System, otherwise known as the NES. The music you hear in the background is from the Game Sound Deco, or GSM, release of the Super Mario 3 soundtrack. I bought this CD. It's an import CD from Japan. I bought it at CGE 2007, which I drove to in Las Vegas, and I listened to this CD quite a bit on the way home. And since this episode is about the Nintendo Entertainment System, I thought it would be fitting to throw this on in the background. We've got a lot of stuff to cover, so let's go ahead and check that voicemail box this week.
Hello, Flack. You have two messages. First message.
Hi, my name is Ted Ruxpin, and I'm a big fan of your podcast. I called to tell you that you're doing a really great job and keep up the good work. I do have a question, though. It's about Commodore computers. What good are the memory expansion modules? I never found a program that actually took advantage of it. If you could explain that, I'll hang up and listen. Thanks.
Well, Teddy, that is a Teddy Ruxpin. Was that Teddy Ruxpin? Ted? That is a good question. The Commodore released 3 RAM Expansion Units, or REUs. There were 3 different models. The 1700, which had 128K of RAM, and the 1750, which had 512K of RAM. Those were both designed for the Commodore 128. And later they also released the 1764, which was 256K of additional RAM for the Commodore 64. These all had different issues. The 1764's biggest issue was that it was such a draw that the Commodore 64's power supply couldn't really handle the additional voltage, so Commodore 64 owners of the REU had to buy bigger power supplies or upgrade their power supplies. With any peripheral like this, you have the chicken and the egg issue, which is, people don't code for it because you don't have the hardware, but people won't buy the hardware because there's no software that supports it. So, what uses were there for the Commodore REU? Well, GEOS supported it right out of the box. So, if you were a GEOS user, you had a RAM drive that you could copy things to and from. Now, I know there were people that used GEOS. I wasn't one of them. But just especially if you just had one disk drive. I had 2, but if you just had one disk drive, GEOS, was just so slow and was such a pain to use. Everything was so much quicker just to use the command line. But GEOS did support it, and there were some utilities, a lot of copy software used the additional RAM, made it easier to copy disks into RAM and then write them back to another disk. And then BBS owners tended to use the REU because the RAM drive was so much faster than a floppy drive or even the Commodore hard drive. So you could copy your BBS out to the RAM disk and run it from RAM, and then hopefully do frequent backups. In 2010, at Breakpoint, the group Crest released a demo called Blue REU. It's BLU-REU. And in the show notes, I'll link to the YouTube video of that. But that was, I believe, the first demo, Commodore 64 demo, that actually used the RAM expansion unit. And as you can see in that demo, if you watch that, there's a lot of different pictures in full screen 320 by 200 and 256 colors, and some different effects. Some looks like some ray tracing going on, things that you don't normally see on a Commodore 64. So, but running one demo or a small handful of games is not really a reason to buy a RAM expander unit. Now, the 1541 Ultimate that I'm always referring to, that I have for my 64, will emulate a Commodore REU. So, any of these programs that were designed to run with that, all you have to do is, put one of these 1541 Ultimates in your 64, and you can actually use the SD card as extended RAM for your Commodore. So that way you can actually run this blue REU demo, or if you really want to use GEOS and use that RAM disk, then that's there for you. So, and it looks like we have a second message on the voicemail box, so let's see what this message is.
Next message.
Hey, Slack. What would be the best old computer to bludgeon someone to death with? I'm kind of thinking the Coleco Atom, because the printer's attached, and so you got this huge thing with really to hurt someone with, but what's your take? Thanks, I'll hang up and listen.
Well, I have to disagree with you. I don't think that the Atom, I think it's going to be difficult to hit somebody with, because I think, with the printer trailing behind, I think that's going to be an issue. The problem with most computers and using them as a weapon is that there's not much to hold on to. Apple II, if you hit somebody with it, that case is just going to fly off. And even a Commodore 64, as much as I love to defend it, I think those keys will go flying anywhere if you really hit somebody hard with a Commodore 64. Now, the Apple IIc, I would say, would be a close contender, because it has that built-in handle on the back, and so that's going to get around that problem of it slipping out of your hands the first time you hit somebody with a computer. If you were going sheer weight, I could go with the TRS-80 Model 3, being all in one piece with the monitor in there, but that's going to be pretty tough to swing. But the Commodore SX64, the portable version of the Commodore, first of all, the keyboard clicks closed into place, which will prevent the problem of the keys flying off everywhere. And it has that giant handle, which would allow you to swing it. And it weighs about 20 pounds. So I would have to say, a close second would be the K-Pro 2, the portable K-Pro, which is similar in design to the SX64, and it's all metal. So it probably weighs even more. And it has some sharp edges. So that might be, that kind of gets away from the definition of bludgeoning, though. More cut wounds on that. But the SX64, I think, if you can find one, I have one right here, and I've never quite actually looked at it as a melee weapon. But yeah, I think this would do the trick. So thanks for calling in, everybody. If you have any questions about old hardware, old games, old arcade games, any questions, or just have a question about bludgeoning people, I'm good for retro video game, retro computer, and I don't even know what you call it. Murder advice. So there you go. Thanks, everybody, again for calling in. If you have feedback about this episode or any other episode of You Don't Know Flack, you can always email your feedback to me at robohara@robohara.com, or you can leave a message on the You Don't Know Flack voicemail box, which is area code 206-309-9501. I want to give a quick shout out to my friend Ferg, Fergoji-san, as he is on my forum, which I always read in a really bad fake samurai accent, Fergoji-san. But Ferg has started a new podcast, and it is the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast. And Ferg's goal of this podcast is to play every Atari 2600 game in the order that they were released, and do one episode per game. So I think that sounds really cool. And last week, right as I was recording You Don't Know Flack, Ferg released the first episode, the introduction episode, which is, it's always a good, people like to listen to the first one to find out what your podcast is going to be about. And Ferg talks a little bit about how he started collecting Atari 2600, and he has a lot of the same experience as I did of going to garage sales and thrift stores and things like that. So it was a really good first episode, and right as I begin recording this episode, I see that Ferg has released episode number 2, which is all about combat. And Ferg is taking emails. He tells you what the next game is going to be, and you can write in if you have stories. I wrote in a story about combat. I haven't listened to it to see if it made the podcast yet, but anyway, if you want to listen to Ferg's podcast, he has a Facebook page set up now, which is 2600 Game by Game Podcast, or you can follow Ferg over on Twitter, which is twitter.com/2600 Game by Game. So if you're an Atari 2600 fan, be sure to check out Ferg's new podcast. I wanted to mention that this episode is sponsored by Doug McCoy, and some of you guys already know Doug from the Retroist website, and Doug also appears on the podcast as a guest speaker, as I do. Doug is the author of 2 different books. The first one is called Anesthetized, which is, it's kind of like Doug's version of Commodore, except for the NES. It is a memoir. Doug grew up playing the Nintendo Entertainment System and has a lot of great stories. Doug also wrote a book called The Arcadian, which is another good book. I think I actually read that book first before Anesthetized, but they're both really good books. They are available for 99 cents on Amazon.com. You can find out about those books and more about Doug over on his website, which is authordougmccoy.com. I have to mention one thing. I was looking at Arcadian on Amazon, and I think Doug's first review is a 1-star review, which I hate when people go on. It's like, if you don't like something, I don't know what, I get it if you want to warn people, oh, don't buy this product. So if you go look up Arcadian on Amazon.com, there's 2 reviews. There's a 5-star review from somebody who obviously read the book and enjoy it. And then there's a 1-star review, and the 1-star review says, I bought this because I thought it would have all the games in it and I'd be able to play them on my Kindle. Okay, well, that's stupid. You just bought an ebook and thought that you're going to be able to play all these arcade games on your Kindle. So basically, this review says, I'm a moron, and I'm going to give this book a 1-star review. So I don't know why people would do that. And plus, basically what you're doing is going to Amazon and giving somebody a 1-star review, an author who wrote this book, over something because you didn't read the details. It obviously says it's a book. And number 2, it's over 99 cents. So it's amazing that somebody put that much effort into going and putting a 1-star review on somebody's product over a 99-cent item. But anyway, go give Doug's website a visit. Again, that was authordougmccoy.com, and go check out Doug's stuff. His books do not deserve 1-star reviews. They deserve 5-star reviews, and they're both very good. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, if you don't know FLAC, you can head over to the website, which is podcast.robohara.com, and click on the sponsors link up at the top for more information. So thanks again to Doug for sponsoring this episode of You Don't Know FLAC. And his NES book, Anesthetized, is a great segue into this week's topic, which is the NES. So in last week's show, we talked a little bit about the video game crash and what a horrible time from 1983 to 1985 was, and that nothing was released. But some of this is not true, as we know. I talked a little bit about the computer games that were released at that time, the arcade games, and there were still Atari games being released at that time. In fact, the Atari 2600 Junior wasn't released until 1985, so there was enough of a market, for that. So there were still console video games, but things had slowed down a little bit and started shifting over to the home computer market. And then in the fall of 1985, Nintendo released the NES, or Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, I don't know anybody that had one actually that early. There was a larger release in the spring of 1986. And so in 1986, I would say is more when people I knew started getting Nintendo Entertainment Systems or NES systems. My friend Jason had one, and to be honest, I only remember playing Super Mario Brothers over at his house. I'm sure he must have had some other games, but that's the only game that I remember playing there. And then my next door neighbor, Doug, he had Super Mario Brothers also, and Duck Hunt, and I remember playing Duck Hunt quite a bit over there. He also had Double Dribble, the basketball game, and Excite Bike, and that was probably my favorite early NES game. I was a big fan of Excite Bike in the arcade, and the home version, the NES version of Excite Bike is almost identical to the arcade, and it comes with a level editor, and you could create your own racetracks in Excite Bike. So we would sit over and just make these crazy levels with a million jumps in them, and little secrets where this area you had to go slow or fast or whatever. So you had to kind of know the level to actually be able to get through it all the way. But I remember spending a lot of time doing that. And then my friend Jeff had an NES pretty early on. And, Jeff, I've mentioned Jeff quite a bit in Commodore and in all my adventures. We both had Commodores, and we both loved arcade games. But they had a NES in their living room as well. So whenever I would spend the night over at Jeff's house, a lot of times his mom would take us to one of the local movie rental places, and we would rent NES games for the weekend. I remember renting Jeopardy a lot for some reason, but we would play Jeopardy, and we would play Super Mario Brothers, and I don't remember playing a lot of role-playing games on the NES, just because, like I said, I was a computer guy, and we had Apple and Commodore, and obviously the PC later on, and I always thought those systems were a lot more geared towards playing role-playing games. So anyway, the Nintendo, the original NES, originally came with Super Mario Brothers. Then later versions had the combo Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt. And then, there were lots of different original bundles, but pretty much everybody that had an NES also had Super Mario Brothers. It was kind of like Combat. It was exactly like Combat. It was the first pack-in game. Combat was the first pack-in game for the Atari 2600, and Super Mario Brothers was the first pack-in game for NES. So everybody had it. And very quickly, it became like a status thing, I guess you could say, to see how good you were at Super Mario Brothers. So, it started like, could you beat the first level? Which, everybody pretty quickly could beat the first level. But then could you beat the first world? And then how far could you get? But then it became more about like all the secret things you could find out. Like, there's a hidden coin brick on this level, but you have to bust out these other bricks to get to that. Or here's where the secret mushrooms are, the one-up mushrooms. And sometimes you found these things, but this is, of course, way, pre-internet. So there were books. Like, I have this book, like it's right here. The Ultimate Strategy Guide to Super Mario Brothers. So, you would buy these books. Hold on, let me get this book. The Ultimate Strategy Guide to Super Mario Brothers. And it says, Worlds to Conquer and Odds to Beat. By Richard Crissell. So you would buy this book. I mean, and one thing I like about it, there's no pictures at all in this screenshot. There's nothing in here. Secret restart. It says, after your game is over, quickly press button A, then press start, then press button A, then press start again. You will continue the game at the beginning of the world you just left. Huh. I didn't know that. So on World 1, there's an entire list here. It says, for example, where to go? Second question mark. What to do? Jump up and hit mark. What happens? A mushroom is released that will make you big. Where to go? Round hill past fourth pipe. What to do? Jump up and hit an invisible brick. What happens? A mushroom is released for an extra man. So, There's an entire book. You think about, you don't have the medium of video to show somebody, where to go or what happens or whatever. So it's almost like this was done in a spreadsheet. You turn the book sideways. So a lot of, when you would go spend the night at someone's house, you would play Super Mario Brothers with them if they had a Nintendo, and you would see what they were doing, and they would show you secrets, and you would show them secrets. So it was kind of this big word of mouth, little Nintendo network of kids. Obviously, you had Nintendo Power magazine and other magazines like that where tips and tricks would get shared as well. So it's amazing that I love, like, when my kids come home and tell me, something like a game that they played at school or whatever, and I'm like, I used to play that game when I was at school. And so it, like, how these things get passed down in other ways other than writing them down. Like, obviously every kid in the last 30 years or whatever must have told some kid younger than them how to play this game, or teachers or parents told their kids or whatever. I think that stuff's interesting. So it was interesting also to watch how this knowledge of Super Mario Brothers got transferred between kids, pre-internet, pre-email, all that stuff. So the biggest Nintendo game for me by far was Super Mario Brothers 3. I think once Jeff got Super Mario Brothers 3, that's all we played. I just remember, like, spending the weekend at his house and playing Super Mario Brothers 3 forever, or until someone hit the Nintendo and it would reset. and then everybody would be so frustrated that you would stop playing. But Super Mario 3, I think every now and then somebody still finds new things in there, or people have gone through the code to find every single thing. But it was just a massive platform game, all these different little secret things and different things to do and places to go, and it was never about trying to beat it as quickly as possible for us. There were all the little warps and things like that in both Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 3. But for us, it was just that whole exploring that world and learning the little patterns and stuff. But Super Mario Brothers 3, that seems like the game that I played the absolute most. So you notice all these stories are about me playing NES over at other people's houses. I didn't get an NES very early on, even though it was released in late 85 and wider release in early 86. I didn't get an NES until the Christmas of 1991. Now, Super Nintendo, which was the successor of the NES, the Super NES or SNES, it was released in August of 91, and I was working at Grandy's, which was a somewhat localized fast food chain in an Oklahoma, Texas area. And this coworker of mine was saving up money to try to get a Super Nintendo, and because that was the new thing, so he said he would sell me his original Nintendo, his NES, and I think it was about 20 games for $100. So that's where I got my NES. I got it from this guy, and it was funny because we both, and I guess maybe this is the sign of a good business transaction, but we both felt like we were ripping the other person off. Obviously I knew I was getting a great deal, getting 20 Nintendo games at $5 a game and a free NES, basically, at that price to go with it. That was a great deal for me, and he took that money and instantly turned it around, and put it into his Super Nintendo fund. So I thought it was a win-win situation. But I had those original games for a while, and then a couple of years later, a friend of mine ended up giving me his original Nintendo and his games too, which I think was about another 30 games or so. I ended up with a total of about 50 games right off the bat, so that was a pretty good Nintendo collection for not much money invested. That Nintendo, the original Nintendo I got, I had hooked up in my room. I had it hooked up to this little small television, and I'll tell you a little bit about that TV here in a minute. So once I got that, I would play Super Mario Brothers 3 sitting there next to my Commodore. I would have things running on the Commodore, like either BBSs or be modeming and stuff like that. So while I was downloading, I would say the Commodore was still my primary source of entertainment as far as it came to playing games and stuff. But the NES was more of like a side. When the Commodore was busy doing something else, I'd flip on the NES and do that. And, I got to say, as a Commodore user, I think, maybe not everybody, I'll just speak for myself, but I was insanely jealous of Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 3 and several of the games, just because, if you look at the specs, it seems like the resolution of the NES is less than that of the Commodore, and so I never understood why Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 3 look so much better on the NES than anything that was on the Commodore 64. And, it got to the point where the Great Guiana Sisters was released for the Commodore 64, which is about two Italian women, or two Italian sisters, who are in a dream world, and it's a complete ripoff of the Super Mario Brothers. It's the Great Guiana Sisters. That game has a story of itself. It could be an entire podcast episode, but there were some very early legal threats which got the Great Guiana Sisters pulled off of shelves. But one of the big cracking groups, Abyss, at the time, went and edited all the sprites in that game. They went in and changed the graphics and turned Great Guiana Sisters into Super Mario Brothers for the Commodore 64. So it was never officially sold or anything like that, but everybody had a copy of it. So that was as close as I ever got to Super Mario Brothers on the Commodore 64. But so yeah, I had this NES, and I had I know I talked a lot about Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 3, but there were some other games that I played. I know that we had Prince of Persia, and we had that on the PC as well, but I remember playing that on the NES. And, like I said, I didn't play, I did have both Wizardry and Bard's Tale, but I didn't, those were more computer games to me. I did play a lot of Tecmo Bowl, football for the NES. I was really a big fan of Tecmo Bowl. And this is a funny story that I don't think I've ever told before, but when I worked at Grandy's, I dated this girl. Well, it'd be tough to call it dating. I don't think we ever went on a date, but I was infatuated with this girl named Stacy. And so several times after work, I would go over to her house, her mom's house, and she had two younger brothers who were twins, and I think they were about, maybe 5 years younger than me. I mean, they're too young to be hanging out with, without the sister being there, of course. But they had an NES, and so I would go over there after work and just hang out, for an hour or something. And they were always playing Dr. Mario, so I started playing Dr. Mario there, which is kind of like... it's kind of like Tetris. It's like these games where you have to line up colors, and if you can do combos and chain combos together, it drops garbage on the other person's side. So I would sit there with the twins and play Dr. Mario. And I remember, sometimes I remember playing with him, and I don't remember Stacy being around. And needless to say, that relationship did not pan out. And I don't know where Stacy is today, but I know where my Nintendo is, so that should tell you something. Anyway, when I moved out of my house, which was into my first apartment, I was working at this pizza place, and I made about $300 every 2 weeks. So I made $600 a month, and my apartment cost me $300, which included all bills and basic cable. And then the other $300 I spent each month on gas, car payment, car insurance. So I didn't have a lot of spare money. I worked at Pizza Inn, and my friend Andy worked at Pizza Hut, and so Andy used to come over all the time. And then after I lived there about 3 months, Andy moved in. But Andy worked 8 to 4 at Pizza Hut. So when he would get off work, he would bring a pizza back to the apartment, and we would have pizza for a late lunch. And then I would go to work at 5 and work, 5 to 11, whatever, at Pizza Inn. And then I would bring a pizza home, and we would have pizza for dinner. So pretty much we just lived off pizza. For breakfast, we would have whatever pizza was left over from the day before. So, but anyway, we had built this entertainment center in the living room out of milk crates and planks of wood. And we had a VCR there. And then we had my NES. And then on top we had my television, which was a 13-inch Emerson television. There was no way you could actually see the television from the couch. It was so small. So you would have to go, like scoot chairs. We had these like outdoor chairs, and we would scoot them up by the TV so we could see, the screen and play Nintendo. And right around the corner from our apartment was this place called Kaleidoscope Video. And every time you would go in there, they kind of specialized in, like, I guess they had normal movies, but they had a giant horror movie section and a giant kung fu section, karate type films. And then the whole back half of the store was just adult movies, So every time we walked in, the guy would say, "Oh, porn's in the back," which is funny because we never rented that there. But we did rent a lot of horror movies and karate movies. But he also rented Nintendo games, and it was really cheap, like $1 a night or something like that. So we would walk over there, rent a couple of Nintendo games, and keep them for the weekend. So we did that quite a bit. But anyway, the funny thing about that television is that it would do this weird thing where if it didn't have power, it would always reset. So if you unplugged it for a day or something, and then plugged it back in, whatever channel it was on, there would just be a giant, like, if you turned it on, it would just say 3 in the middle of the screen. It took up like a third of the screen. So you could still change channels on the front of the TV, channel 4, 5, whatever, and watch TV, but you had this giant number, and you had to use the remote to set the channels, and then those numbers would go away. So the couch in our apartment was also a fold-out couch, a sleeper, and we had folded it out one time, and the remote got stuck under the couch, and the remote for the TV got broken in half, which wasn't a huge deal because we were always sitting right, in front of the TV, so you could just reach up and turn it on and off. But one day the power went out, and when we came home and turned the TV on, it had gone back and lost all the channels. So the whole rest of the time, the only way you could set it was with the remote, and the remote was broke. And this was like before universal remotes, where you could buy those everywhere. So we still played Nintendo on this TV every day, but there was a giant number 3 right in the middle. And, when you get so used to something, you don't see it anymore. Like, I barely even saw it. I remember doing pretty good and playing, even though, a big section of the screen was obscured by this giant number 3. But what was really funny is we used to play the original Mario Brothers, where you would try to attack each other, or, that wasn't really the goal. The goal was, to get through the levels and kill all the creatures. But we used to just fight each other. We did the same thing with Joust. And so you could kind of use this giant number 3 to your advantage. Like, you could just hide behind the number, So, like, if you were playing Joust, you would run around and then you would just hide behind the number 3, and the other person would be hiding somewhere, and then, you could hear them flapping, and then eventually, they might just come out of nowhere and try to attack you. And the same thing with the Mario Brothers, you would just find a good spot to hide. So you're too busy watching where your character is that you didn't always see where the other person was hiding. So that became kind of a home field advantage, if you will, was getting used to playing games behind a giant number 3 on the television. So we spent a lot of time playing Nintendo on that TV. So in the fall of 1993, Susan, my wife, back then we were friends, but we weren't even really dating. She had moved about an hour away to Weatherford and was going to college there, and they just bought this brand new mobile home, And so the plan was for her to stay in the mobile home and go to college and rent out the other 2 rooms, because this was actually cheaper than living in an apartment or a dorm. So I had talked to her that summer, and I decided that I would move out there and go to school as well. So I moved out to Weatherford, and I brought all my stuff, my computer and my CDs and, everything that I had. And Susan was moving in as well, and so I was helping her unpack, and I remember she had this box, and we pulled the tape off, and she pulled 3 things out of this box. And the first thing was her Nintendo. So she had an NES as well. And by the way, the second thing she pulled out was a Commodore 128 that had been her dad's. And the third thing she pulled out was a framed picture of the Three Stooges. So based on those 3 things, I pretty much knew at some point that we would get married. Any girl that moves in and brings her Nintendo, her Commodore computer, and a framed picture of the Three Stooges, you should hang on to that woman. And so I did. So we had hooked the Nintendo up in the trailer in the living room, and I don't remember playing it a whole lot at that point. I mean, this is 93, 94 when we lived there, and so, the NES, it's almost 10 years old at that point. But we did still play it. Her favorite game, she did play a lot of Dr. Mario. She played a lot of Tetris. And her game and her friend's game, they loved playing Gauntlet. She has all these stories about these marathon Gauntlet sessions that they used to play in the dorms with her and her friends. And so occasionally we would play Gauntlet on the NES as well. But yeah, so we still had that NES, or we had hers, and I think mine was probably in storage at that point. So let's talk a little bit about that time during the 90s. I know Ferg mentioned this on his podcast last week, and I've mentioned this before. I mentioned this during the thrift store episode of You Don't Know Flack, but man, the 90s were an awesome time when it came to garage sales, thrift stores. I probably picked up, I don't even know, maybe half a dozen Nintendos, and you would just get them because, you would go to a garage sale and someone would say, here's an NES and a giant box of games, and the whole thing would be $20, so it was cheaper to just buy, the whole thing. And by the time, by the late 90s, when you start seeing eBay or whatever, I mean, it was over, you would still occasionally find things out in the wild, but not like it used to be. I mean, you used to go to thrift stores and there would be stacks of Nintendo games for $1 each or $2 each. You go to antique stores and there'd be games for $2 or $3 each. Garage sales, you'd pick up just giant boxes. Some kid got tired of it and they put the whole thing out and you pay $10 or $20 and just, buy these collections. So I had a personal rule, which was I won't pay more than $5 per Nintendo game. And I have over 300 NES cartridges, which is ridiculous because I don't really consider myself to be an NES collector. But, that's what I would do. When I would go to thrift stores, if I saw NES games that I didn't have for $1 or $2, I would pick them up, And that's just how it was back then. You could get them anywhere, and you could get them super cheap. Like I've said before, by the time you had eBay, you had online sales, you had all this stuff, and when it became more of a collector's item than just old stuff, when it was old stuff, it was worthless, and that's when I built my collection up. Now, it's retro and it's cool and it's collectible. And the prices went through the roof, and people found out you could make money by flipping this stuff. And that's pretty much when I quit buying it. I mean, the collection that I had is the collection I have. So, and one thing that's always helped me is I've always kind of been a generation behind when it comes to video game consoles. Like, I had the Atari 2600 for so long that, I got the NES after the Super Nintendo had already been released. I got my original PlayStation for Christmas in 97, and it came out in Christmas in 94. So, by the time I got into these consoles, people were already, ditching, there wasn't not on a wide scale, not built in natively. None of these consoles supported backwards compatibility. You couldn't just plug an NES game into a SNES. Now later on there were adapters, and things like that. But you could do that in the early days. So when the Super Nintendo came out, people ditched their old Nintendos. When the Nintendo came out, people ditched their old Atari collection. So that's kind of what I did. Was I just stayed a few years behind. It wasn't a big some master scheme plan that I came up with. It just worked out that way. But when everybody was buying up NES stuff, that's when I kind of built my Atari collection up. So I do still play Nintendo to a certain extent today. I've got 3 different ways mostly that I do it. The first is in my entertainment room, or whatever you want to call it, our little upstairs living room. I built a home theater PC, and I put a bunch of emulators on it. And I actually bought 2 wireless Xbox 360 controllers that are dedicated to that. So I use those. I bought the PC wireless kits for them. So I got 2 controllers dedicated just to that. So occasionally we fire that machine up, and you can play. Mostly we play MAME on it, to be honest, but it does have the NES on it. So occasionally we play NES games up there, but really we don't do that too much. I also have the NES emulator for my iPad, and I talked about this a little bit on one of the iCade episode. I do have the iCade, but I also have the iCade 8-bitty, which looks just like it's laid out like an original NES controller, but it's Bluetooth. And the NES emulator for the iPad supports that controller. So, I'm never going to be a fan of these like a virtual touch version of a pad on top of a tablet. It doesn't feel right. My thumbs are always in the wrong place. They always move, and I'm not pressing where I think I'm pressing. But playing it with a controller is not bad, So, in fact, I'm going on a trip next week, so that's one of the things I plan on doing is taking the 8-bit controller and the iPad and getting some game time in a hotel room. So that's the second way. And then the third way is on a Retron 3, which is a clone. A Famiclone is kind of a generic term for these Nintendo clones. There's been a lot of them. There's been the Yobo, there's been the FC. So different clones where people have basically retro-engineered or reverse-engineered the old Nintendo consoles and built new versions of them. And they all have different varying degrees of compatibility issues, but the Retron, I actually got mine free from Video Game Trader magazine. If you aren't a fan, be sure to check out Video Game Trader magazine. I do write articles for them, and they have joined forces with J2 Games, which is another great online website and great store if you're in the Atlanta area. But anyway, they sent me a Retron 3 to review for the magazine, and I hooked it up, and the Retron 3 actually has slots for NES, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis cartridges, so it plays all 3. And the bigger selling point for me was it also has the original ports for the controller, so you can actually plug in the original NES controller, Super Nintendo controller, or Sega Genesis, and use the original controllers to play the games with. So I hooked the Retron 3 up in a little spare area in the house, and that would have been probably last September or October maybe, and it's been hooked up there ever since. I drug I have this 30-gallon tub with all the Nintendo games in it now, and I drug that out, and it's been sitting by that TV ever since. The kids have been digging through. Actually, truth be told, Susan's been getting the most use out of it, and every now and then I will hear the music of Dr. Mario coming from upstairs, and I know what she's doing up there. But the kids have enjoyed playing it as well. They enjoy the Mario games, and just going through and doing that. And that's actually saying a lot, because Mason's game of choice is Call of Duty, the newest Call of Duty on the PlayStation 3, and Morgan has, she got an iPod Touch, and I think she's installed every single thing that's free from the iTunes store. She has 900 million different little free games on there. So it is kind of a testament to the NES that it would even hold their attention, but they have enjoyed it. They've gone back and played some games. I'm still waiting for Susan to invite her old college friends over and have a marathon gauntlet session up there, which I'm sure is coming sooner than later. But now, one thing I've talked about on some of my older podcasts is my console copiers. I have several. I have a fairly large collection. I mean, I guess a dozen or so, but that's pretty large compared to most people's collection of console copiers. So I have several for, probably the most is Super Nintendo, and I have a couple for Sega Genesis, and 3 or 4 for the Nintendo 64. But I've never seen a console copier for the original Nintendo, and that was because Nintendo games use different mappers. And it's kind of like the way that the internals of the cartridge were laid out, like where the different things were stored. And I don't think that the console copiers do a good job. You would have had to program the mappers into the console copier, and so it's not really a easy thing to do from a hardware standpoint. But instead of console copiers, now we have flash cards for the NES. There are a couple different ones out there. The one that I've probably heard the most about is the Power Pack, which is about $135. It's not compatible with the clone system, so you'd have to use it on an original NES. It's also not compatible with all mappers, so you could go online and find out what games will and won't work with it, but there are several games that won't work with this. And they have a compact flash version where you could put a CF card in there, or there's a USB version where you could just plug it into your computer and copy games over. But the exciting new one that is on the edge of coming out is the EverDrive N8. And the PAL version has already been released, but I think everybody's kind of clamoring and waiting for the NTSC version to pop. Right now, the PAL version's $109, and it uses an SD card. So with an SD card, you can easily put the entire Nintendo collection on one card, plug it in, and then just go through the menu and pick whatever game. And apparently, based on what I've seen just on the mappers that are listed, it's very compatible. There are, with any of these things that's not 100% original. I mean, whether it's a flash card or a clone system or an emulator, there are always going to be little things that don't work or little things that aren't exactly right. And, you really just have to decide how much those things are worth to you. I mean, on the Retron 3, which is, I think, probably the most compatible NES clone that I've ever seen, there are a couple of times where the music's not quite right. Like one voice channel is higher than another voice channel or something, or a color is off just a little bit. And, like my kids, they don't care because they never played the original. My wife doesn't even... it doesn't faze her at all. So, I guess, if you put an original NES side by side, you would definitely be able to see differences, but it just matters if those differences matter to you, I still have my original NES. I think when I moved in with Susan, we didn't need 2 hooked up. So I just took that NES, my original one, and boxed it up. It's always funny when people say, like, well, when did you get into retro stuff? Because I always think it wasn't retro when I got into it. I mean, people say, oh, the NES is retro. It wasn't when I bought it. I mean, it was a couple years old, but yeah, all the old stuff that I have was new stuff when I got it. It's just old now. I did, when I bought my Super Nintendo, I was working at Best Buy, and the PlayStation was already out, and they had marked the Super Nintendo down to $99. So that's when I bought my Super Nintendo. And right after I bought it, I decided I was going to sell my original Nintendo. And someone suggested that I sell it at a pawn shop. And I had bought a lot of stuff at pawn shops, but I had never sold anything in a pawn shop. I didn't even know, how it worked. So I boxed up all my Nintendo stuff and took it down to this pawn shop. So I had a Nintendo, the controllers, the Zapper, of course, and about 50 games. And I took it into this pawn shop. A guy looked at it, and he said he would give me $30. And I was like, what? Like less than $1 each per game? And that doesn't even, include the system. And I knew they were selling games for, $5 each or $10 each or whatever. So I was like, nah, I think I'll keep it. And I'm glad I did that, because, I mean, how much money for those of us, that are into all these silly hobbies have we spent, rebuying things that we had as kids, I mean, for me, like I hung on to most of my electronics. I mean, the old computers and the old video games and things like that. But, how many toys have I bought that I used to own as a kid or that someone else owned and I always wanted, or, movies that I remember watching as a kid. So it's like we're constantly buying these things that we used to have and rebuying them. So I'm glad that I didn't get rid of that original NES. I'm glad that I hung on to it and all those games. And like I said, during the 90s, those games just seemed to multiply. So now I have more games that are boxed up. Actually, they're in a tub in the hallway right now. But that's pretty much it. That's my story about the NES. Played it back then. I still play it off and on today. I thought it was a great system and filled that great little niche during, it really brought us back from the video game crash. Those few years where it looked like things were taking a downturn. So Nintendo saved the day. So that's kind of what the console means to me. That concludes this episode of You Don't Know Flack. As always, I want to thank everybody who called in and who wrote in this week. And thanks again to Doug McCoy for sponsoring this Nintendo dedicated episode of You Don't Know Flack. Don't forget you can pick up the digital versions of Doug's books, Anesthetized and Arcadian, over at Amazon. And there are links to those over on Doug's website, which is authordougmccoy.com. Doug also has several blog entries I just checked earlier related to the NES and the arcade stuff. So even if you don't have a Kindle or don't want to pick up those books, be sure to check Doug's website out. Next week's show is going to be about programming, basic programming specifically. So if you have any feedback about that or any basic programming questions, you can always send them to me at robohara@robohara.com or leave a message on the You Don't Know Flack voicemail box, which is area code 206-309-9501. Thanks again for listening to You Don't Know Flack, and we'll see you next week.